Hi everyone, I'm here with another live and unedited video to answer a great question, which is why your symptoms might go up and down throughout the day, and a related question, which is why your symptoms sometimes get worse after they've gotten better. So to answer the first question, I just want to remind you about the stress dizziness relationship. So we've talked about this exhaustively in other videos, but to remind you, stress chemicals in your brain are what happens when your brain is on alert. It thinks that there's danger. And those are the chemicals that activate your dizziness response. So stress and dizziness are very highly related. In many cases, the simplest explanation for why you're having changes in your dizziness throughout the day are stressors that are happening that are directly activating your dizziness. And stressors can take the form of some of your triggers, like movement, activities, or positions, but they can also take the form of stressors that are more emotional in nature. So if I ask my patients to think about it, most of them will tell me, yeah, I noticed my symptoms get worse when my spouse yelled at me, or I noticed my symptoms get worse when I got this really scary work email that told me about a big assignment I now have due. So look for those little triggers, those stress triggers for your dizziness, and you might be able to explain some of the patterns of ups and downs throughout your day. Now, the second explanation is a little bit less obvious, but it also has to do with stressors. So sometimes the stressor isn't as clear, like your spouse yelled at you and therefore you got dizzy. Sometimes it has more to do with your daily routine. So when I dig into this with people, very frequently what I'll find, and this is most common with people who have time-related dizziness, so their dizziness occurs at a very specific time of day, or just in the morning and gets better throughout the day, or just in the evening and it's okay throughout the day. Very frequently what happens in those situations is there's something going on in the routine that is a source of stress. And this can also be difficult to identify sometimes because the source of stress isn't always a bad stress, like someone yelling at you, or an obvious one like I just got a work assignment. Sometimes it can be as simple as you got up in the morning and started checking work emails and you knew immediately you had to be called to action. That could be something that your brain is interpreting as danger and stress and therefore activating the dizziness. It can be also trying to get the kids ready for school or dealing with a toddler in the morning. Again, not situations that you would say, oh my gosh, this is so stressful and I hate it, but stress nonetheless that your brain interprets as danger and alarm and therefore can activate those dizziness patterns. As far as evenings go, very frequently what I'll find is that there's an accumulation of repressed stress throughout the day. So you're busy, you're dealing with life, you don't have time to sit around and do somatic tracking or parasympathetic breathing. And at the end of the day, your stress levels are up to here and your dizziness levels are up to here as well. So in both of these situations, rectifying this requires you to take a look at your routine and see little things that you might be able to modify to help reduce your stress. And it can be as simple sometimes as just scheduling in a few moments to breathe, or just recognizing when the stress happens and taking just a moment to ground before reacting. That can be enough to diffuse dizziness in those situations. Now, for some of you, the stressor might be even less obvious than the two previous examples that I mentioned. For some of you, it's important to remember that the brain is actually a prediction machine, and we talked about this in a previous video. Your brain doesn't just respond to things as they happen. That would not be good for survival. If we had to respond to things as they happen, you would be putting your hand on a hot stove every time and then taking your hand off the stove when it's hot and it burns. No, our brain has to be able to predict things in order to protect us from danger. So your brain will predict situations that cause stress, and that leads to an increased stress response, which of course then leads to increased dizziness. So one way that you can find out if this is happening to you is to pay attention to your thoughts before you get dizzy. So if you notice, for example, that you have time-related dizziness, like you always get dizzy in the morning, what is the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning? Am I going to get dizzy? What are my symptoms going to be like today? Or something else stressful? I wonder if the kids are going to be terrible this morning. Could be another one. So paying attention to what those thoughts are might give you a clue about why your dizziness is getting triggered at certain times of the day. Now, For some of you, though, those previous three explanations might not resonate. For some of you, you may have already looked at your triggers, you may have already looked at your routines, you may have already examined your thoughts to see when your brain might be predicting dizziness and creating it, and none of those things seem to line up. In those cases, I can still guarantee that it is your brain that is predicting that the dizziness is going to happen and therefore creating the dizziness, or predicting that stress is going to happen and then creating the dizziness. But for some of you who have been under chronic stress, either now or in the past, you may have a harder time recognizing symptoms of stress in your body. And that's actually the cause of your dizziness in some cases. So many of you had the onset of your symptoms at a time of extreme stress in your lives. And when that happens, very frequently you're just trying to get through that period of extreme stress, which is completely understandable. So none of this is your fault by any means. But it's important to recognize that when you're doing that, when you're just trying to get through, I've just got to make it through, this is just so hard, I've just got to make it through, you're actually teaching your brain to keep the stress inside. You're not able to really express, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out, I can't fall apart right now. I can't be fearful right now. I can't have alarm right now. So you're shoving it down inside. In other words, you're kind of desensitizing yourself to your own stress response. You're teaching yourself to ignore your stress response. When you have taught yourself to ignore your stress response and some of the accompanying emotions for a while, your brain gets good at that too. So you may not even be able to feel changes in stress or emotions throughout your day that are triggering dizziness, but they may be there underlying those symptoms regardless. And you have to train yourself to be more aware of these stressors. Sometimes that can be as simple as starting mindfulness meditation and body scans and starting to check in with your body a little bit more, taking breaths throughout the day, doing little body scans throughout the day. For a lot of people, that's enough. Actually, for a majority of you, that's probably enough. But some of you, especially those of you who've had significant childhood trauma, it's really important to either work with a mental health counselor or to avail yourself of some of the resources that I've included on my previous videos, which I will also include here, regarding how to work through some of those emotional situations that may have taught your brain to keep those stressful emotions or feelings inside, and therefore has caused you to not be able to recognize them and understand why your dizziness is going up and down. Okay. And then finally, sometimes, again, we don't understand our biology. We can have biological fluctuations that have nothing to do with anything that we're consciously doing. For example, fluctuations in hormones, especially estrogen, like throughout the female cycle, those can cause fluctuations in dizziness as well, not through any subconscious stress response type of mechanism, but because we're working with a biological circuit here. So we're working with dizziness is on a biological circuit that's influenced by other parts of our biology. So there's always the possibility that physiological factors that are not under your control are causing your dizziness to go up and down throughout the day. Regardless of what it is, though, of any of the ones that I previously mentioned, I want you to just understand and internalize this. It is completely normal for you to have fluctuations throughout the day. Not only is it normal, it is an excellent, excellent sign that this is a neural circuit type of dizziness. In other words, this is dizziness from a mistake your brain is making, from a pattern your brain is making. It's not dizziness from a medical cause, because you wouldn't typically see large fluctuations in response to stress if this were from a medical cause. Okay. So to answer the second question, which is related but a little bit different, why your brain would suddenly make your symptoms come back after they've gotten better. So to understand this, it's helpful to understand the concept of extinction bursts. And extinction bursts refer to when a behavior temporarily increases when you're trying to get it to go away. So if you've ever worked with a toddler, or maybe an adult who acted like a toddler, if you've ever tried to train that person or child out of a bad habit, and not that a child's not a person, but you know what I'm saying. If you ever tried to train that person out of a bad habit, you may have noticed that when you try to train them out of it, they temporarily increase the bad habit. So an example of this would be experiments that they conducted on rats back in the 60s, in which they had the rats press a lever to get sugar water. And then when they turned the sugar water off, the rats would actually increase the number of times they pressed on the lever. You would expect them to stop, right? The sugar water stops, you press the lever, it's not working. Okay, well, I give up. There's no sugar water. No, on the contrary, they would continue to press the lever even more intensively than before because they wanted the sugar water. So that is what we call an extinction burst. Your brain is used to this way of communicating with you. It's used to this way of responding to stress. When you start to train it out of this response, sometimes it will double down on its efforts to communicate with you in the same way that it knows how. So this is a very, very common process, this extinction burst process, where your symptoms will suddenly come back after starting to taper down. And I want you to understand that it's actually a really good sign that, again, what we're dealing with is neural circuit dizziness, and that if you stay the course, you're going to get better. Extinction burst just refers to the fact that your brain is used to using its dizziness muscle. It's used to being dizzy. It's used to using the dizziness to deal with stress. And you're trying to teach it a new way. And it's just doubling down on its efforts to get your attention. And the best way to respond to it is to listen to what I just said and remind yourself when it happens, my brain is just trying to get my attention. It's just doubling down on its efforts to get my attention because this is a new way of doing things and it likes staying in the way things were, even though it was uncomfortable for me. The brain likes doing things that are predictable, like we talked about, prediction machine. It's trying to make things predictable. So if I just keep going, I can train my brain out of this. All right? So I hope those were helpful explanations for those questions. You guys have been giving me some great questions lately, and I have a whole bunch more topics that are going to be coming out in the coming weeks, either in this format or the longer format. But as always, I can't thank you enough for tuning in. Thank you so much, guys, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.